Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Michael, and he's done it. Wilson's going to fall here for Alexis. Henry, chance, goal!
This is me, Lean, from arsenalvision.co.uk. Hello, listener, and thank you for joining the show. In today's episode, James, Elliot and Paul discuss our wonderful victory at Old Trafford against Manchester United. And it was a wonderful victory. One that we haven't seen for many years over there. And it's about time too. I thought we went into the game really positive, both committed, right attitude on the ball, attacked them, closed them down. It was just the performance you wanted to see from us. Yeah, before the game, I was quite confident that we would actually get a result over there. Maybe I'm always confident about a result and I don't realise it, but what tends to happen, or appears to happen, is that before a big match, Arsenal fan base as a collective are either really confident or really negative about a result. Like the Monaco game, for example. Everyone was certain we were going to win. I was certain we were going to win. And we lost. Obviously, this is a lot of rubbish, but that's just the feeling I picked up on. Everyone, almost everybody that I read or heard or spoke to were like, we've got a poor record over there. We're not going to win. We're going to lose. We're going to go out. Everyone was saying it. I thought, why is everyone so certain we're going to lose the game when they're rubbish? And really, they're pointing behind us and we're sneaking results every week. I thought, if we're going to beat them away, this is our time to do it. And yeah, we were really focused and it was really good to see. Really, I haven't been that excited after a game for a while. I just thought we played really well. We deserved everything we got. I was very shocked about our lineup there before the game, though, I must admit. Didn't expect Giroud to be left out of the team. Since he's come back, not only has he been scoring goals, apart from the Monaco game, he's played really well for the team. He's worked hard, he's been a focal point, he's linked the team together, and I expected him to start. Especially when you think about the aerial power of Fellaini from set pieces. That would have been a concern. That was my concern before the game when I saw the team lineup without Giroud. But it didn't matter, did it? The way we dealt with Fellaini was fantastic. I mean, everyone, from Kos to Mertesacker, Francis Coquelin as well. I thought we dealt with him really well. Petered in the air and won practically all of his knockdowns. Fantastic. And in the second half, after they went 2-1 down, all I did was play it long to Fellaini and he got no joy. He might have won the first ball from occasions, but he couldn't keep the ball. He couldn't direct it to his players because we defended it really well. Almost like we've planned it in advance, you see? It does happen. You just have to keep an eye out for it. Yeah, and Danny Welbeck starting as a striker, which was a bit of a shock. Not only him starting in the team, which I kind of hoped he would before kickoff, but when he has started in the team, he's played wide left and Alexis has played up front if Giroud's not been playing. But he went back to a centre forward position, which was a surprise. Didn't have his best overall game. His touch wasn't at its best. He didn't link the play as well as he could do. He hasn't played for a while. He's played the odd game here and there, a few off the bench, but you can't get back to your best without playing a run of games. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was being back at Old Trafford. I don't know. But what Welbeck does give you, and what I do love about Welbeck, I really love about Welbeck, is the amount of work rate he gives the team in his fight. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if it's Man United, Swansea, Burnley at home. I mean, he gives the same amount of commitment every game, every time he's on the pitch. And that's great to see. And that's why, for me, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I wouldn't be upset if he was first choice every week because of that reason. It helps the team. It really helps the team. He's got to work on his finishing, though. And he's a bit of quality in the final third when you really need it. He doesn't always have that. He might get it, he might not. But what he does always have, as I said, is his fight. And I do love that. And it's that fight that wins, that gets him goals or assists. Like against Crystal Palace not too long ago, Giroud's pass to him was poor. It was a really bad pass. Most players would have seen Giroud's pass, sail over their heads and thought, I can't get that now. Defender's got it. And just leave it and just jog towards the player or stand off or throw their arms in the air. Theo Walker, for example, I don't want to single him out. What he does is fantastic when he's on his game and does what he does. But he's a perfect example of a player who will not get the ball exactly where he wants it. And, he'll do the same. He'll just jog over to the player and then it'll get played out and then nothing happens. But Welbeck, that's not his mentality. If it's a 50-50, or 40-60, he goes for it. And he sprints after the player, and he tries to make a challenge or a block or pressure him. And he does it all the time. And that's what got us our winner in the end. He was the player who forced Valencia into the mistake in the first place, closed him down, Valencia's poor back pass. And the thing is, as I said earlier as well, I mean, it was a short back pass, but it wasn't that short. Think about it. There wasn't much in the race between their keeper, Danny Welbeck. Yeah, he sprinted after it, got there first, poked it around the keeper. Open goal, 2-1, and the winner. So thank you, Danny boy. And a great celebration, wasn't it? Such emotion and passion from him as well. Lovely to see. And we are through now. And obviously after the match, we got the draw. Bradford or Reading at Wembley. I'll take that. I'll snatch that right out of your hand. Anyone's hand. Yeah, if we play to our best, or, play at a good level, we can get to the final. A long way to go, because we've got a good chance of facing Liverpool if we get to the final. And they are the form team of the Premier League. So, can't be overconfident of winning any trophies just yet. It's far too early. We've got 2 games to go in this competition. If we do get through, then possibly very, very tough game in the final. If they get through Blackburn, which I think they probably will do. So, yeah, but let's just enjoy this while we can. It's very enjoyable. But I must say, I don't want to take anything away from us at all because we were magnificent. But Man United, my God, weren't they poor? They're really, really bad. I just thought they had a really bad game on the night. But after the match finished, I was listening to a well-known radio station. And there's a lot of Man United fans phoning in saying, the best we've played in a while and blah, blah, blah. And I heard it a few times. I thought, really? The best you've played? Wow. That says something then, isn't it, really? How are they a point behind us? That's the best they've played for a while. It's a bit of a concern. I'd be concerned. But yeah, it's not my problem. It's not my business. So anyway, I've been rambling on for far too long now. So anyway, I'm going to shut my mouth now and head off into the distance, smiling and skipping along. And I'm going to hand you over to the guys to discuss the match. Take it easy and we'll be back after the next game. Come on off.
Unprepared chokers come up flat in big game. But enough about Manchester United. Let's talk about Arsenal. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. And if I sound delighted to be here, it is only because we just beat Manchester United at Old Trafford to knock them out of the FA Cup. And it feels like only yesterday, 9 years ago, that we beat Manchester United at Old Trafford. But if you ignore the last 9 years, it was literally yesterday that we did it. I am joined by 2 gentlemen who will also be delighted to discuss this fine, fine example of association football. The first is James. You can find him at GoonerFanatic49. And James, I'm sure you are delighted to be here.
Wembley, we're the famous Arsenal and we're going to Wembley.
Wembley. All right, yeah, okay. Sure.
Good evening,
ribbon,
boys.
Sure, yellow ribbon.
Good evening.
Okay, good evening to you. And as always, pausing in my pants on Twitter, Paul on the podcast. Paul, welcome in. Woohoo! And those of you who are fondling your microphones, please stop because it is driving me nuts. James, I'm looking at you. Admit it, James. You're fondling your microphone.
I do love fondling my microphone.
Okay. Well, we're gonna kick on anyway. It is a famous victory for the famous Arsenal that sends us back to Wembley, back to a semifinal, and back to a semifinal against lower division opposition, which we handled with no problems at all whatsoever last season. So I'm sure we will handle it with the same aplomb or similar aplomb this season. But the big news, of course, is beating United at Old Trafford for the first time in 9 years, winning a game in a big moment when it was really needed, salvaged our season, I think you could say, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. Let's start first with the lineups. There was no Olivier Giroud. That was probably the big surprise. Welbeck started instead. We'll start with you, Paul. How surprised were you by the lineup, and in particular the omission of Olivier Giroud, and what do you think was the cause of that? Simply rest and rotation, the psychological lift for Welbeck? What did you think when you saw the starting 11?
Well, I absolutely didn't see that coming. I would have been sure Olivier was starting. I mean, Arsene talked a week or two ago about, how Olivier can only play through the middle and everybody else will have to fit around him. And the tone of it was very much that we put Olivier on the starting 11 and then work out who will fit around him. Maybe that's an overstatement, but certainly it led me to that kind of confidence. And based on his recent performances. But I think Arsene told Welbeck late, by all accounts, by his own account, and he used the word psychologically as one of the two reasons. Our fast-paced pressing and harassing was maybe the other reason I think he spelled out there. But the fact that he left it late, and he even said he didn't know till late that Welbeck would be starting, makes me think that Arsene went back and forward quite a few times in his own mind, deciding which way he would go. I think the other really interesting thing was it was really nice to see that combination of Welbeck and Giroud coming on, and the different attributes they brought in different parts of the game kind of ups our tactical kind of options based on that success, that template going forward. That was a really nice piece to carry forward. But, there's loads to talk about in that overall lineup. I thought that was one particular thing that surprised me, and there were a couple of other ones.
All right, well, we'll come to those in a moment. James, as for you, surprised to see Welbeck start, and what do you think he gave us that maybe we would not have had in Olivier that may have turned the match, other than, of course, the match-winning goal?
Yes, I was slightly surprised to see Danny. Prior to the game, my prediction was that Olivier would start up top with Ozil and Sanchez either side of him, and Ramsey coming in alongside Coquelin and Santi playing it, the 10 role. So, but the back four was as I'd expected, and certainly with Wojciech in goal. I mean, listen, the luxury we have now of the squad is, despite the 3 changes, so Alex came in at right wing, Santi came back and played the sort of the deeper lying midfield role, and obviously Welbeck up front. But ultimately, even when you see that lineup, the difference between those two 11s is minuscule. And I think what Danny brought to the team was, aside from, obviously the psychological component of coming up against an old side, but on top of that, with a manager who had, made some fairly underhand comments towards Danny, basically suggesting that he wasn't good enough for United. It gave him that extra impetus to go on and score what ultimately became the winning goal and write a quite remarkable script. But, it does tend to be the case that players coming back against their old side, and unfortunately we've seen it far too often, for the other way around, that those types of players do come up and score big goals. And I think the psychological component definitely plays a big role. But from an actual, qualitative side of things, I think what Danny brought to us was just that work ethic, which I think that Olivier does bring too, but that pace alongside Alexis and of course Alex, the 3 of them, they really harassed that back four and they put them under pressure a lot. United were constantly forced to play the ball back to De Gea, and force them to play a slightly more negative brand of football, I think. And we really pressured them early on, especially away from home. And I think that really sort of set the tempo for the game. And I think that had a huge impact on the way in which the game played out, because we made it very difficult for the United back four to get the ball to the midfield. And we saw that Herrera was taken off for Carrick, I think, to slightly aid that. And Jones came in at centre-back. And ultimately, the goal that they conceded, which was extremely sloppy, came to them again, forced to play it backwards towards De Gea. It was a poor ball from Valencia. And of course, it was that guy that ended up slotting it into the back of the net.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I thought our pressing in their half was so crucial to how the game played out. And I thought that it prohibited them from playing the ball through the midfield, building up their attacks from back to front. It reduced them to a lot of long ball and wide play, which we handled relatively comfortably. And, that's the thing that I think we've missed. The energy of Welbeck, Ox, and Alexis up front means you can really harry and press with just your front 3. And then if Mesut Ozil isn't giving that as much, and Cazorla isn't giving that as much, you still have the energy, the enthusiasm, the work rate, the desire to press just from your front 3. And so much of what we did that worked against United, I thought, came from dispossessing them, turning the ball over and creating short counterattacks and transition play. The game started out, it was a great cup tie, right? I mean, it had good energy. Both teams seemed to be going for it. as the game settled into a rhythm, I thought that we were on top early. They did get in behind on a few occasions, but by and large, it didn't look like they were going to be able to play their way through us. Paul, do you think we showed more confidence in this game than you've seen us have in big games recently? And if so, what do you attribute that to?
Absolutely, we showed more confidence. I mean, it was, as the word goes, it was palpable. I think coming back to me, two key players, you could go across our 11 and say there was really nobody who didn't play well. Even coming back to somebody I and many have been critical of recently. I mean, Per Mertesacker had a really strong game. It was maybe a game that suited him a little bit more, but there was a strength there at the back that we've had and lost at different times during the game. But I think, to me, the big driver was the energy that this team really wanted it, that there was a confidence there. And to me, the leaders in that, maybe the upgrades to where we have seen those performances before. Coquelin was absolute. It wasn't his cleanest, tidiest, maybe even best technical performance, but this was a day to be combative and to show we weren't going to back down and we weren't going to take no shit. And between him and Mertesacker, pushing back, harrying, containing Fellaini, and our midfield three, I thought was clearly key. And I think Van Gaal agrees with your summary of that first half by swapping out Herrera, who was actually, possibly their most dangerous player in that first half, but they were just losing that midfield battle. So I think between that front three, Welbeck and Coquelin in particular were the upgrades for me in terms of energy and passion and fight, and doing to United what they've always tried to do to us very successfully over the last decade, which is allow us to have the ball, but then intercept.
Well, I'm going to jump in because I can no longer hear you, Paul. I will assume that what we are missing right now is the finest example of analysis in the history of Arsenal Football Club. James, are you still there?
I can now hear you, yes.
You can hear me, okay. Paul, on the other hand, Paul is literally gone. But we're going to bring Paul back in. Have no fear. While we are bringing Paul back in, what we are going to do is we are going to send it over to you, James. And what I wanted to ask you is this a case of the king is dead, long live the king? And what I mean by that is, once again, our past success rate was 74%. We had 42% possession. Those are not numbers you would traditionally associate with Arsenal victory. But increasingly, those are the numbers we're seeing. And some of that, I think, is due to Arteta not being in midfield, having players who want to dribble more than they want to play short passing, like Oxlade-Chamberlain, like Alexis Sanchez. But it certainly seems like when we've won the big games this year, not that there are huge examples of that, but on the examples where we have, that's been the recipe for success. Is this the new Arsenal way? More counterattacking, less possession, less careful, controlled passing, and more higher risk, higher reward passing as we counterattack through the midfield?
I'd be cautious to use the word new because that requires some context. I don't think this is something that Wenger's never implemented before. In fact, I think he's used this type of approach on several occasions in the past. I just think he now actually has the capabilities to actually implement it properly.
Let me ask you this. Is it driven by the manager's philosophy or is it driven by the personnel? What I mean by that is, if we had Arteta and if Sanchez wasn't in there dribbling 6, 7, 8 times a game, would we be more back to what we consider traditional style? Is this coming from the manager, or is this something he almost has to do and we have to do because of the personnel?
Well, I think it has to come from the manager because the manager is the one that creates the squad and sets up the way in which the team on any given day goes about its business. Sure, maybe if an Arteta is available, does that alter the way we approach a game slightly? Perhaps. I don't think that one change necessarily completely alters the complexion of the way that we set ourselves up, though. I think it ultimately comes down to us, and I think we do tend to see in these big games, perhaps, I think he's always for the most part, been somewhat pragmatic in these bigger games when there's a lot more riding on a fixture. Perhaps he's been even more so this season. Certainly what we've seen, the City away game, to a certain degree the Liverpool away game, because albeit we were dominated throughout, we came away with a point rather than coming away five goals to 1 down. Even the Chelsea game where we lost 2-0, we tried to be more pragmatic. Chelsea were just the better side. The problem with it as well, though, is, of course, you can look to the Spurs game, where perhaps you'd like to think Spurs would have somewhat of an inferiority complex when playing us, or perhaps we should have a superiority complex in that you would like to see us against that kind of team dominate. But so it's a fine line sometimes, and I certainly do think that this more pragmatic, counter-attacking willingness to concede possession and to control the game without the ball is something we've improved on vastly from. Perhaps vastly is a slight exaggeration, but we certainly improved on it from last season. And I think it's been a big contributor to these away games, and certainly something that's important to implement in these types of knockout competitions. And it does, unfortunately, in that it does make you hark back to the Monaco game and does make you wish that perhaps we'd taken, not necessarily, especially at home, but perhaps, tempered in the way in which we approached that game slightly. But yes, going back to your original question, I do think that that counter-attacking style, that ability to concede possession, to allow a United who, who based on that performance, they looked tetchy, they looked nervy, they weren't great with the ball. They had a lot of possession. I think a lot of that comes down to the way in which we harassed and harried them, and how solid and compact we were and combative at the back. But they didn't really cause us as much trouble as, say, Spurs did when we went away to their place, or Liverpool did. They didn't bring that as much pace and verve about them, both on and off the ball. So I think that certainly helped the way in which we went about our business.
It's funny, too, because I think ordinarily if you win at Old Trafford, you're going to be pointing to sort of a heroic defensive effort. And a lot of your top players in the game are going to be defenders for the work they did, making last-ditch tackles or crucial interceptions or blocking shots. I don't think that was the case. I mean, United did get in behind a couple of times, but by and large, they just didn't seem to carry the threat. It was a strange game because it was fairly open, but they never felt incredibly threatening. I live in constant fear of what Arsenal can do to itself, shooting itself in the foot, hip, knee, head, whatever. But it never really felt like that impending doom was hanging over us, even despite letting them get back to 1-1. Paul, let's just cover the Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, especially in the second half where you thought it would ramp up, they were more dangerous in the first half. I mean, they had practically no shots on goal in the second half.
Yeah.
So although we scored in the first half and it was nullified quickly after, I think that was a key goal and a key moment that turned the tie. I'm looking at those pictures of the guys celebrating with a certain sadness in my eye as Nacho's in the air, knowing that 2 minutes later we were going to concede. But I think what it showed Van Gaal was that, they were there for the taking and we were there to take them. And he got nervous and he panicked and he did his, our manager tends to trust the players ahead of tacticking, whereas Van Gaal trusts himself more than his players. So halftime, now I think Shaw was injured, but he yanks off 2 players at halftime to make the big Van Gaal substitution and made them less potent in the second half. And but even in the first half, I think we did enough to scare them, and we got the first goal, and we shouldn't have conceded their goal. So I think that was a really big moment in the bigger scheme, even if they got it back to 1-1 very quickly.
Well, the manager alluded to that. I mean, he said we were disappointed at halftime to be 1-1, and we felt that we should be ahead and that we were the better side. So I tend to agree with you. I think that first goal, was a weight off our shoulders in a way, because I think it showed us that we could break them down. We could get in behind them and score. And it was a beautifully worked goal, worked down the left side. Ozil's pass may have sold Oxlade-Chamberlain short, but what he did from there was nothing short of sensational. Paul, what did you think of Oxlade-Chamberlain in the 50 minutes he was on the pitch and that cameo of Maisie dribbling to set up Monreal for the goal.
He was great. When I first saw the lineup, I was still trying to compute what were the chances that he'd be part of that kind of double pivot with Coquelin midfield, as I was trying to work out how they'd all lined up. But there he was up front, harassing, working, his Maisie runs. I mean, he did a few of those. But I do think you can't separate out his performance from that of Ozil, Alexis, Welbeck and the Ox. It all just worked together as it did in that move where Monreal clinically put away that goal.
So cool.
Didn't it feel like maybe not slow motion, but like 3/4 pace? It's like he saw where he wanted to put it, and like a finisher, he put it away.
It was crazy. It reminded me almost of like a Thierry Henry finish. It was just passed right in around the keeper and comfortable slot home or Pires or something, because he didn't panic and De Gea was left. I mean, it's the only time in the match when De Gea really couldn't get to a shot. He had a brilliant game. We'll come to that in a moment. But one of the things that I think we mentioned already, but it really set the tone for me was the energy with which we pressed them in their half, and we really got at them by getting the ball off them in their half or forcing them into rush decisions on the ball in their half. James, when you have Oxlade-Chamberlain, Welbeck, and Alexis up front, we talked about this, you have that energy to press. In the debate of Welbeck versus Giroud, there's really no debating Giroud's clinical finishing this season. He's been excellent finishing this season. But all the other things Welbeck gives you, the ability to press harder, chase down faster, get on loose balls quicker, get past the back line. Do we have a greater dynamism with Welbeck in there? And is that dynamism critically important to this new way of playing, given that we're not possessing the ball as much and therefore we may not need a fulcrum around which the attack pivots, but more a dynamic, energetic work rate player? Do you think this style of play lends itself maybe better to Welbeck playing center forward more regularly?
Well, his style of play is certainly more dynamic and adds a different dimension to the way in which we can utilize that front three. That's a certainty. I think it's a weapon that can be used in certain types of games. You would imagine it makes, certainly theoretically, a lot of sense to play that type of style of game against, like last night, big teams away from home, where we're likely to concede more of the ball, look to harass and harry the defenders, and the opposition as much as possible, and look to hit them on quick counter-attacking football. That being said, I think Olivier does bring he's still a player that puts in a significant shift like Danny. He does a lot of the things that Danny does from a defensive point of view, but with a little less pace, or a lot less pace. Even.
Yeah, I was going to take issue with the word "little" there. Yeah,
yeah,
substantially less pace. Yeah.
But
I mean, Giroud doesn't score the goal Welbeck does.
Sure, probably not. But then again. Yeah, it's easy to make that comparison, isn't it? But ultimately, I don't think that Danny had a particularly great first half, and perhaps that was part of the psychological component that you could attribute that to. I mean, his touch was a little loose, his link-up play wasn't as strong as it normally is, and
I agree.
He eased into the second half. But that was my opinion certainly of the first half, and you could see Danny. I think he got taken off ultimately for Olivier because he. At least from where I was, sitting watching the TV, he looked like he was absolutely knackered, and that was a testament to just how much of a shift he did put in. But I do think, as much as Danny does bring that, you see he's extremely quick, he's extremely athletic. I'm still not entirely convinced if he often makes the right kind of runs, or perhaps last night there were a couple of times where he could have been picked out and he wasn't. We don't, outside of that goal, there weren't can you name an occasion in which we played him through in behind goal, or where he runs on the back of the back four and he's constantly looking to make that type of run in behind? I'm just not sure if he's, although he has the capabilities of doing it at this moment right now, I don't see him as being a striker that consistently is able to get into those positions, and currently has the know-how. Or even, frankly, for the most part, I don't think he's anyone as strong a finisher as Giroud.
No, clearly that's the area where Giroud has the advantage right now. But just 1 year ago, we would have been saying Giroud needs to start finishing his chances.
Yeah, but then again, I do think Giroud's athleticism in the air and his link-up play is a lot stronger. And I think that's actually one of the components of Giroud's play that I appreciate the most. And I think that's probably something we look to use far more against teams in which, certainly teams either
smaller
at home
teams, weaker teams,
or smaller teams,
yes.
weaker teams, but also big teams at home, I'd imagine. When we're more likely to try and control the possession of the game and control the tempo of the game.
It's a fascinating debate, James, because I think what we're basically saying is if the new style of play, especially in big games and big away games, is less of the ball, more harrying and pressing in the opposition half, more quick transition from defending to attacking, then Giroud's touch and physicality and hold-up play becomes a little bit less valuable, and Welbeck's pacey, pressurizing ability to run in behind, ability to create havoc with his pace and dynamism starts to become maybe more of an asset. I mean, it's something we'll see play out down the road. I think the best way to sort of summarize it is to say it's great to have two center forwards who bring different dynamics to the team. And given his age and relative inexperience, I think Welbeck will only continue to improve. Real quick, though, Paul, your thoughts on what Welbeck contributed from the center forward position and whether that change in dynamic was critical to our, you'd have to say, improved performance against United?
Sure. Well, I take a little issue with James's view on his first half.
Yeah, me too, by the way.
But it was very much my view when I watched.
Hey, Paul, are you still there?
I am, yeah. Can you hear me?
Just for all the listeners, I'm on the brink of pushing stop on the record button so that you don't have to bury your way through this. But we're going to do this live on tape to reduce the amount of editing that has to be done by our silent editor. So how are you feeling about your internet signal at this time, Paul?
Great.
You're feeling great about it?
Yeah.
Okay, bang on. Let's do it.
Right. So with Welbeck, I think the issue with him in the first half was certainly his touch going forward and attacking, but I thought his contribution to breaking up their play and regaining possession for us was crucial. I thought he actually ended up having a really good first half, or an important first half. I think you could have played Giroud or Welbeck yesterday. There's arguments for why either one of them would have worked well, but Welbeck certainly came out with a huge amount of credit going forward as a potential centre-forward selection for future games. And my feeling on the substitution for Welbeck was more that Arsene wanted to bring Giroud on for those to close out the game with about 20 minutes to go, because he expected we were going to get bombarded with long balls into Fellaini, set pieces, etc. And he wanted Giroud on the field for that, and as an outman for clearances upfield. That was kind of my feeling on the balance between who played when and why. And I thought it was a really nice use of the two centre forwards on the day.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I've heard people be critical of Welbeck's contribution, particularly in the first half, and I disagree only because some of the things he did on the ball didn't come off for him, but everything he was doing without the ball was so crucial to why we were having success. His running, his pressure, his energy, and there was one moment where Ozil nearly slipped him through behind the back four, and he just got it caught in his feet. Otherwise, he would have been in. I think he is a player who gives us a totally different way of playing, and not to be redundant, but if we're going to have less possession and less pass accuracy and play higher risk, lower, less conservative football, so to speak, in some ways, then I think he gives us a fantastic option. One of the things we have to discuss in analyzing this match is the performance of the referee. And look, it's impossible for three Arsenal fans doing an Arsenal podcast to sit here and be unbiased and objective. But let's try to be as unbiased and objective as we can be. And the way I want to look at it is this way. I'm going to ask you guys about individual decisions. And I'm going to ask you, and then I'll give you both an opportunity to expand. But I want one word yes or no answers. I'm going to give you an incident, and I want you to each tell me if you thought the referee got it right. Okay? And then we'll expand on it a little bit, if that works for both of you.
Sure.
Good, great. I'm excited about this.
As are we.
You sound it. You sound excited. Trying to kill all your enthusiasm for doing a podcast post Manchester United away victory. So, all right, and we're gonna just do the big incidents, okay? Because I mean, obviously, we could go over every little niggly Fellaini foul, and we'll dive into that when we go into it in more depth. But we're gonna go over the big incidents. So, first things first. I'm just gonna do them in the order that I remember them. The Angel Di Maria dive yellow card. Correct decision, yes or no, Paul?
Yes, I was amazed, but yes.
Yes. What about you, James?
Absolutely, yes.
I will say no, that it should not have been a yellow card there. Or certainly I wouldn't have expected it to be. The red card decision, Paul, obviously yes? Hands on the referee?
Yes, amazed, but yes.
James?
Yes.
Okay. Adnan Januzaj dive. Correctly called? Paul?
Yes.
James?
Yes, amazed, but yes.
Yeah, yes. I mean, that dive was an absolute abomination, by the way.
Totally agree.
That was
Totally agree.
Absolute disgrace of a dive.
And you know what's funny about that dive? If he stays on his feet there, we're in real trouble. Real
exactly,
trouble.
right?
I thought there was a huge praise for Monreal in this match, but he did get beat quite a few times. And the goal aside, on the ball, his defending wasn't fantastic. He did get beat, and Januzaj did him a favor by falling down there. And then one more decision. Bellerin's second yellow not given. Correct or incorrect, Paul?
Tough one, because I think he made a decision based on the game. So at another point in that game, I think he would have given a second yellow and he would have been off. So my feeling is, for the sake of the game, I thought this isn't me being unbiased. Trust me. I understand why he made that decision. It would have been a slightly soft yellow that would have changed the game.
Yes. Yeah. The absolute. Okay. So what about you, James? That decision not to give a yellow there. You agree with it, or you think we got away with one?
Well, Paul put it very well. I think if you look at that foul in a vacuum, it certainly could warrant a yellow. But if I recall correctly, Bellerin, having picked up a yellow card in the second minute of the game, that was his second foul. So to have gone an entire match to pick up, to commit 2 fouls and pick up 2 yellow cards in itself would have been harsh for what would have been albeit somewhat warranted yellow card, a soft one to give. So I can understand why the ref didn't give it.
Yeah, I would say this. If I were a United fan, the only call that I'd be outraged by is that one. I think there are a lot of other referees that give that as a sending off. And I think Bellerin was very, very fortunate.
Yep.
Having said that, I think Fellaini could have been off after about 15 minutes. For some reason or another, when he commits fouls that are yellow cards for other players, they're just not yellow cards for him. And I don't know if that's just the size of his body. The referee thinks there's nothing he can do about it. But he is a niggly fouling son of a bitch, and he just gets away with it. I mean, I don't want to harp on referees too much because they've been a point of discussion everywhere all season too much. But I said I'd offer you the chance to expand. So, James, quickly, any other thoughts about the refereeing? I mean, other than the calls we went into, would you say you could understand why opposition fans might be annoyed, but overall just a perfectly fine refereeing performance?
Yeah, I mean, of course I can understand for an opposition fans after a loss like that. And perhaps the shock of actually having a referee that put in a somewhat honest performance. But yeah, I mean, look, there's always contentious decisions, and there are decisions that you can, like the Bellerin one, where you can argue it both ways. I'll also qualify pretty well any of my statements regarding the match that I was sufficiently inebriated and had a heart rate that was sufficiently high enough for me to not perhaps recall every single refereeing decision that was made. I mean, there was like a penalty shout that we had that I didn't think was ever going to be given. But I do vividly remember,
it was a penalty shout, by the way, for Welbeck, who had gotten in behind and got pulled back over the shoulder.
Got kind of pulled back down.
But
it was a pretty soft pull. Yeah. I mean, I vividly remember shouting at the TV screen on numerous occasions, using pleasant language, no doubt, directed towards the referee regarding the number of fouls that Fellaini had committed throughout the entire game. I think you put that quite well, actually, in that perhaps because of the size of the player, the type of fouls he commits, that if another player, say like a Bellerin in particular, did the exact same thing, they probably wouldn't bring the opposition player down, or they probably wouldn't. They probably would have zero impact upon the state of the play. But just because Fellaini's so big, I mean, it doesn't take much for him to knock others over, and I think he knowingly uses that to his advantage. So I think that's quite sneaky of him. I mean, I think the referee, for the most part, had a very solid game, but perhaps because I'm seeing it through red-tinted Arsenal glasses. But I was very happy with the way in which the referee dealt with the match, and I think, to be fair to him, like I said earlier, he had a very honest performance, and I think he stuck true to his guns.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I'll tell you this much: if I were a United fan, and God, that's just a horrible nightmare scenario, but if I were, I think I'd be furious with Di Maria and Januzaj, because even though those were two huge calls, Di Maria's, the reason I said I don't necessarily think that should be a yellow is there was enough contact that even though he went down easily, I think giving him a card for diving is a bit too far. I think it's a no call, but I mean, I certainly don't think it's a foul. But I think it can be a case where it's not enough contact to warrant a foul, but not a dive enough to warrant a card. But I think it's close. But the point is, I'd be furious with Januzaj and Di Maria, because Di Maria put his hands on the ref and sent them down to 10 men. And Januzaj, from a position that would have had us in huge trouble, 4 yards out on the right wing, at the end line, instead he just flings himself to the ground. I think that was. Those are two cases where you can be mad at the ref, but your players let you down. Paul, I mean, final thoughts on the referee?
Yeah, if I were a United fan, I'd be furious at those guys too, except that's the kind of shit they've done for the last 10 years, and it's got them penalties and it's got them results. So, this is a whole new world for Manchester United supporters. They're used to having a manager who has referees on speed dial, on his cell phone, talks to them before games, after games, banishes referees to lower divisions, saves referees from the clutches of other big clubs who are beating them up. This is very disorienting for them. So can I understand opposition fans being upset?
Yeah, to be fair,
with the
To be fair, the players who flung themselves to the ground in this case made the mistake of not being English. So you got to factor that in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate to everyone listening, because Paul probably doesn't know this. I am not interrupting you, Paul. I am speaking when your internet cuts out to avoid excessive dead air. So apologies if it appears to you as though I'm interrupting you. But to the fine listener, they will hear just an elegantly produced podcast as ever. Let's kind of move on towards the end of the game. We held out. We got the victory. I want to kind of cover what the ramifications are from this match, because obviously this is the kind of win that we desperately needed, and it is the kind of win that we haven't had in a long time. You could argue that beating Manchester City was similar, but I think considering that the league position we're in is really just another race for fourth, I don't know how massive it is, but this win means silverware is still potentially on the cards. This win is eliminating United from their only hope of silverware at Old Trafford. So it is just such a massive victory for so many reasons. Paul, stay with you for a second. Let me ask you this. Bigger win for the players, bigger win for the manager, or bigger win for the supporters?
Really good question. And I don't have an answer for that because I actually composed a tweet along those lines an hour or two ago, and I was thinking about it. It's huge across the board for what I can say is for the players, it's huge at this particular moment. They needed to be able to prove to themselves as a group that they could take down City, that they could take down United, so that they're ready to take down Chelsea. So I think it was absolutely huge. I think it was huge for Wenger. I could give you a long explanation why, apart from A, you already know, and B, you all saw that huge smile to himself, not to the rest of the world, that he held and held as he walked off that pitch. Big deal for our season, big deal and then for the supporters. I mean, if you go across the spectrum, apart from the most ludicrous kind of wing of our supporters, whether you're for, unsure, or against the manager, this is what we've all been crying out for this team and this manager to be able to produce against a team. This isn't United at their best. We expected our club to be able to go and get a result. Maybe not every game, maybe not every season, but some seasons. And this was the season, this was the game. We came, we saw, we conquered. It was there to be had. We looked, not only did we all said we didn't care if we won badly or whatever it took. Well, we were the better team on the day. We held our head up high. We had the energy. We had the belief. Great stuff across the board. Very unifying. I think this is very, very healing. Now, it can all be flushed down the toilet pretty quickly after a few bad results, but this will give us some resilience going forward, some belief that racking up points against smaller clubs or blah, 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 or even an easy FA Cup run through to the final wouldn't have done for us. This builds resilience within the unity between managers, supporters, and that squad, that team, even if not all supporters are fully bought into the philosophy.
That last point is the part that I totally agree with, because for me, beating Everton in QPR had done literally nothing to dent my frustration over what happened against Monaco. This hasn't erased it, but has gone a long way towards erasing it. These are the kind of wins you need to make up for the kind of thing we saw against Monaco. And who knows, maybe there's still another chapter to that story, although I'm not going to hold my breath. James, let me ask you that, though. We beat City away, and in our next two big games, we got comprehensively outplayed by Spurs and lost away, and then shit the bed against Monaco at home. Do you believe in turning corners where players and managers are concerned, or is this more a case that Arsenal are a good team with warts and flaws, and we're in a period now where we're going to win the occasional big game, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to turn around and choke and lose the occasional big game? Or do you believe this is really corner-turned chance to really improve going forward?
I don't really necessarily want to talk about corners being turned until when you look back on a season.
That's fair.
I think you can perhaps look at a change in mentality or a change in results as a result of one particular moment or match per se, in which you can perhaps hark back and perhaps refer to it as a corner that was turned during the season. It's a little too metaphorical and a little too substantive now to refer to this United game as being a corner that was turned. I think it's huge, away from having beaten a big side away from home, which personally, I mean, I probably was one of not many, but I'd been pretty confident in the quality of this side since about, I'd said it was around early February, late January when we really started to be a team that was capable of doing that. And it was shown by City. So I personally didn't think the small sample size of a Spurs away, I think that Monaco home game, I think that the way in which he went about it, I mean, that I think that was a different matter entirely. I don't think that demonstrated that we're incapable of beating those types of teams or beating big teams as such. I think it was just an absolute. It was a disaster for several other reasons that I'm not going to go into. But I'm not sure that I personally did not think that we could win a game like this prior to the United victory. But I do think it has now given us it's removed that kind of inferiority complex we've had for so long especially going to Old Trafford, but just play against United in general. And I think that in itself gives a huge boost, because my biggest fear going into this game was perhaps this mental block that we have. There's just amongst the fan base, you can tell, certainly with me, who I tend to try and be quite positive. I genuinely hadn't even really considered an Arsenal victory last night, although without a doubt, I would have told you before the game or throughout the season that we're the better team and the better squad. So it's great to have seen that, and I think that in itself, that mental boost, the natural bonus that has provided, and of course the victory in itself, and I think even more importantly, perhaps the stage of this in this season, following that Monaco loss, and we saw it on Twitter. I especially saw it with you, Elliot, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will fully admit I lost my mind over that Monaco game completely.
It hit people extremely hard, and don't take me wrong, it hit me hard as well. But we constantly find ourselves at moments in these last couple of seasons where there's a very fine line. Everything is held in the balance, where if one thing goes a little bit wrong, you just get the sense that a large portion of the fan base is going to get very vitriolic.
But can I just address that just really, really quickly, James? I'll give it right back to you. But that's not something that happened overnight. That pressure, that valve has not been released in a long time. I mean, that is the end result of disappointments, poor big game results, lack of progress for many, many years. I mean, that would not have been the case in 2005 or 2006 or even 2007 or even 2008 and probably not 2009. But, by 2012 and 2013 and 2014 and last year with the 5-0 and 6-0 and 6-3 and 3-0 to Everton and, failing to top weak groups in the Champions League and the performance against Anderlecht at home and what we did to Monaco in the context of finally a chance to improve in Europe against an understrength squad, it just started to feel to me like the squad is getting better, but what he's doing with the squad is getting worse or at very least not progressing. So, I wasn't a raving lunatic every year for the past 9 years. I've only become a raving lunatic in the recent past. It's a build-up towards raving lunacy.
Right, and listen, I completely get all that, and I agree with about 95% of what you said. The one bit where I disagree, and that's just fundamentally why I still back the manager entirely, is that I do see progress, and and listen, this is probably a discussion for another time because it involves a whole cohort of things, but I do see very gradual progress, and I fear, or I believe that fans that we are, we tend to, I don't know, I think certainly our interpretations of change or our interpretations of the kind of quote unquote progress that we expect the team to make are very different. In my eyes, taking a club out of this 9-year period or 10-year cycle of this, a club that we can talk about all the, being financially hampered, and all this mental psyche and everything that's created for this club. And I would, I've gone so far and I've mentioned it between the two of you that we've always, at the very least, reached par for the course. I don't think we've ever truly failed under Wenger.
No, and by the way, I agree. He is the master of stasis. He is the master of delivering the status quo and a relatively high status quo. But as fans of any sport, status quo has diminishing returns in terms of the excitement and joy it can deliver. Getting blown out by your rivals and getting knocked out disappointingly in the first hurdle of the Champions League knockout rounds is a very high, and finishing fourth is a high status quo, but it is going to have diminishing returns in terms of the joy and entertainment value it delivers.
Oh, without any doubt, 100%. But obviously, if we can, take a step back for a second and to a degree perhaps agree that over that period of time, in that Arsene Wenger hasn't truly failed, but if you can accept the fact that we're expected to come fourth and that the large majority of managers would have done so, and I would even of these like managers that we throw up in the air, I would say there's a higher chance of any new manager, like whatever type of strong manager we could bring in, there's a higher chance that they would have done worse than Wenger. Then there was a chance of them having succeeded as consistently as Wenger and also gone on to bring more trophies and create more long-term and success and longevity for this club. Because ultimately the biggest goal has got to be the success of the long-term success of this club, like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. And I think that's where we've truly succeeded. But I think if you can accept that there to a certain degree has been a level of success with that type of success, which is coming fourth. And I know it's difficult to say this as an Arsenal fan. I know that, fourth isn't a trophy, and yes, okay, we as an institution and club shouldn't be celebrating this whole coming fourth. But ultimately, through virtue of getting there, especially in a game like football, as unpredictable as it is and as sort of unrelenting as it is, there's going to be several different ways in which your failures are going to come about. In that, I know that there are certain aspects of the way in which Wenger has done things, and it's very obviously there's a stale component, a very repetitive component to it over the years. Especially, for example, the way in which we lost big games away from home last year. Perhaps the repeated, just beating the smaller teams but constantly losing to the bigger teams, and the naivety of I don't know, this having a load of players charging forward against United at home and Monaco at home, and failures in the Champions League. This consistent sort of drumming home of, it's this Groundhog Day constantly repeating itself. But I think any of these types of failures would have taken place with any type of manager. Not these specific types of failures, but there would have been, other managers, the way in which they would have set up a team that probably has the expectation of coming fourth and not beating the Barcelonas and the Bayern Munichs and the AC Milans, or being less likely to in these competitions would have also had maybe they would have had Bradford at home losses in the FA Cup. I don't know, but there would still have been, and we've had our Blackburns and our Bradfords, don't take me wrong, but these things are likely to happen just based on on probability. Over the course of a long tenure, you're going to have damning results. And unfortunately, you're going to be less willing to accept them under a period of stasis and during a period of so-called staleness. And frankly, the reason why I'm more positive about, especially coming out of perhaps this United game or the season in general, is the progress I see is restricting those big losses that hit me hard last season, like that Chelsea away game in particular, that really struck home. It's not that
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, keep going. Yep.
It's not that I can accept losing at Stamford Bridge and such, but if you go to Stamford Bridge and you put in a certain performance and you at least play to the best of your capabilities, you can accept to a certain degree that you're playing your side that's probably better than yourselves, right? And the way in which we ended up losing last season, those were extremely damning defeats. There's no denying that. But I've seen progress in that regard. I think also the way in which a squad has changed, the way in which the shape of a team changes is very gradual. It's very difficult for us as fans to take perspective on it, because I feel we're always demanding short-term results. We take a very short-term outlook on things. We look at very small sample sizes. Like even in doing this podcast, we look at matches and we try and glean certain aspects of the squad and certain directions or corners that we're turning directions that we're moving as a team and as a squad. And it's not as simple as that, because it's a very complicated setup. It's running a football team is a lot more difficult than we can ever truly appreciate.
I understand.
But anyway, I think going back to my original point, the big key for me for this game was I did feel it was another one of those games where if we did get knocked out, which was a high chance given we were at Old Trafford, and it wouldn't necessarily have been down to the tactics being, having been wrong, or the performance not necessarily of being up to scratch or whatever it was. But I think there was a big chance if we got knocked out last night, there would have been a huge amount of disappointment, especially so soon after that Monaco game. And for me, that was one of the biggest reliefs, and sort of biggest contributions to the ecstasy that was involved in that game. And I think that will definitely give the supporters, the manager, and certainly the players an enormous boost.
Yeah, look, there's a lot there that I want to respond to. I want to bring Paul back in though, and then I'm going to give you my three quick thoughts on that. Paul, it's now another genuine chance for a trophy, and I don't want to sell short the other teams that are still participating, especially Liverpool, obviously, who would be a big challenge, but. Do you feel that if we do get knocked out by Monaco, do come fourth in the league, or third, fourth, something thereabouts, and win the FA Cup, do you think that there's a chance that may not be received with the same euphoria that it was last season? Or do you think we're still excited enough for any trophy we can get? I mean, the FA Cup is a big, big trophy. Do you think that will still be seen as a very successful season?
I think it will be received with a little less euphoria, but maybe a little bit more confidence, given that along the way we beat City, we beat United. I disagree maybe a little bit that I do think a corner was very potentially turned in this United game for this season and going forward. I think it's a huge, huge deal. And I think it will be a great salve to those, the disaffected who didn't necessarily think that an FA Cup was in the end a cure-all,
right?
Or getting fourth, or getting fourth again. You mentioned QPR. I get all that. I share that frustration. I was nuts after the Monaco result. I think we all were. Maybe my only slight difference was I just slightly more hopeful that Wenger did have what it took to get us there, with no more facts than anybody else, just crossing my fingers a little harder that he's too smart not to get us there. Based on what? Based on, we all have our prejudice, biases, and emotions. And I have always felt he'd find a way or he wouldn't still be here. That's my prejudice. So I think it was huge yesterday. I think winning looking at the FA Cup, the way I keep my feelings in check is to say, we probably got a 75% chance of winning the semis against Bradford Reading, and it's 50-50 in the final. So we have a good chance, but it's still less than 50-50 when you multiply up those odds. So staying calm. I see progress, whatever happens this year. I think we all saw it in the squad, in the performances in general. We needed to see it against the bigger teams.
I think in light of how we played against Wigan last season, you can't just put us through to the final. But let's do it for a second and say we're in the final. The reason I think this result was huge for the fans more than anyone, first of all, we haven't won at Old Trafford in 9 years. The players have changed. The fuck do they care about 9 years? The manager obviously has the calm and the vision to not think about things in that way. But the fans do think about it in that way. And we needed this. But also, if we had lost, and assuming we crash out to Monaco, it would be another 3-month end-of-the-season slog to just dragging our way over the fourth-place line. And I think we've had too many of those seasons, and they wind up devolving into a lot of misery and argumentativeness, along the way. This means that if we make it to the final, our season continues into May with something serious to play for, with the possibility of a trophy. And that is so important for the supporters to not have this just boil down to 10 more games to come forth. So I think for the supporters, it's crucial. I want to quickly respond to James, to what you said on a couple of points. I think the problem with stasis is that stasis is boring. So if you said to supporters, for the next 10 years, we will always finish fourth while never challenging for the title. We will always get knocked out in the first round of the Champions League. And we will always win the FA Cup every single year. That's 10 trophies in a row, 10 FA Cups in a row. I wouldn't sign up for that deal. because the simple fact of there not being an upside, not being a chance to hope for a title, not being the excitement of getting a little deeper in the Champions League and having visions of hoisting that big-eared trophy that's eluded us, it wouldn't be fun. Eventually, in sport, stasis stops being fun unless that stasis is, existing at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. So I think Wenger is a bit of a victim of his own stability, of his own continuity, and the fact that these seasons have felt very familiar, even if they have been at a fairly high level. The other thing I will say about Monaco, the reason it hurt me is if we had played out a 0-0 for 89 minutes and they had scored off a jammy, bundled-in header from a corner kick in the 90th, I would have said, you know what, that sucks, we underperformed, but we can go to Monaco and turn this around, and you know what, they're a good defensive team, that can happen. The reason I was furious about Monaco was not just the loss, it was the naive way we played, the careless and reckless way we played, looking like a team that's never been in Europe before, not realizing this is 2 legs, 180 minutes. It was everything about that game. And that, I think ultimately that comes from the manager because he instructs the players on how to play. And his ethos, his mindset, his discipline should permeate the entire playing staff. So that's why Monaco hit me hard. Not the disappointment of losing, but losing in such a childish manner with 2 legs to play for. And the comments of the manager afterwards basically saying, I don't know why we played that way. We were naive. I don't know why we were defending that way. That's not really permissible for me. So that's why I was hit hard. That's why it hurt me so badly. And that's why I was frustrated because to me, the squad is getting better. That team with Alexis and Cazorla and, Giroud in great form and Mesut Ozil, gosh, that is a team that should go and rip Monaco to shreds at home and not play like, school children. So I don't want to make this negative because ultimately my feelings today are extremely positive. I feel more bullish on the manager than I have in a long time. I feel excited about our run into the season now because even if Monaco goes badly, we have silverware still to play for. We could have a famous final against Liverpool, which, while it would be difficult, would be so exciting, on the final game of our season. And the FA Cup was so enjoyable last year. I would enjoy it and suck all of the juices out of it again this season. So it was a huge result for us, and we're ticking over towards an hour. We've had some internet problems. We've made our way through. I feel a little bit like Arsenal yesterday. We've shown great quality and mental strength to get through to this point. So let's wrap up with just some quick final thoughts. Paul, from your end, personally, how much did this win mean to you, and how much does this impact the excitement with which you will look at the next 2.5 months of this season? That's for Paul. Hello, Paul. I praise our mental strength and our internet connectivity, and at the final whistle, we blow it. This feels a little bit like the third goal. Oh, he's here.
I'm here.
All right, it felt a little bit like Monaco's third goal for a minute. Okay, so on a personal level, how much did it mean to you yesterday, and how much does it impact the way you're looking forward to the run into the rest of the season?
All is changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but besides that, no, I thought it was a hugely significant, huge game. I think it changes everything in the rest of the season. I think it changes our run-in, confidence levels. I think it changes the Monaco tie. We've got the FA Cup. I think it changes how we go into the summer. I think it changes how we go into next season. I think it changes how Mesut Ozil feels about this team now 2 years into it, how Alexis Sanchez feels about this coming up to the end of that year. It changes it for Danny Welbeck. It changes it for Francis Coquelin. You can go down the list. I think this was huge. It changes it for how Arsene Wenger feels about his the interplay. Yesterday was a really interesting balance of playing really good football with pragmatism. How we went out to play, how we played, how we made our substitutions, how we ended up the game. It wasn't, we've won other games where it's this crazy flurry at the end. Well, we managed this game the whole way through. I just think potentially you can't live off this. Potentially you can build and keep topping this up with better and better performance and growth. So, I got my fingers crossed that this was as big as it feels.
Yeah. And the reality is, look at what it changes now. I mean, let's say we draw to West Ham at home this weekend. It'll suck. It'll feel bad. We'll bitch and moan. We'll be annoyed. But top four is still possible. We can still get there. But the difference is we'll know we've got a Wembley semi-final on the horizon and potentially a final after that. And so there's still a reason to look forward to this season and what it holds. And there's still mystery to this season. And, there's just so much to be happy about now, not to mention the win itself. So, James, final thoughts from you personally. How much did you enjoy this victory? And, I know you tend to be, as you've mentioned, pretty optimistic and upbeat to begin with, but how much does this influence your enthusiasm for a season? Let's face it, this season, from Champions League group phase to Champions League knockout round to a lot of the big games, City aside, to league position, to just general performances, it hasn't been my favorite season. I think for a lot of people they'd say that. This can now become a famous season. I mean, how much did this change for you in terms of just how you enjoyed it on the day and how you're looking forward now to the end of the season?
I mean, this game was huge for me. I haven't felt that sort of amount of ecstasy. I felt, it was slightly more pronounced during the FA Cup win, but certainly biggest win this season. It's the best I've felt for a long, long time. And it's a testament to how great it can be to support a football club when you have victories like that. And it's why we're so disappointed when they're almost taken away from us quite so consistently in the past against the big sides. But it's huge. It's huge because like we've talked about, it just there's so much more breathing room now for the fans. And like you said, of course, I generally come across as the optimist, and I do try to be optimistic, I hope within reason. But it's mostly to do with the long-term status of the manager, because I certainly don't see him leaving over the next 2 years. I certainly don't want him to leave over the next 2 years, even if we'd gone on and lost last night. But that being said, I have been pretty disappointed with the season. Not so much in the Premier League. I think we are where I would pretty much have expected us to be at this stage. But I was just as disappointed as you, honestly, about the Monaco defeat at home. I really love the Champions League. The Champions League is my favorite competition. It's my favorite competition because we've never won it. And there's the excitement, there's the aura of the Champions League, playing all the biggest European sides, the home and the away tie, and going, being able to play teams that we just, otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity of playing against. And so I was supremely downbeat, and I would have deemed the season without, even if we now don't go on and win the FA Cup, if we get to the FA Cup final, maybe there's arguments, but even still, if we don't win the FA Cup but get knocked out of the last 16 of the Champions League, I'd still, perhaps to a certain degree, but certainly if we got knocked out last night, the season without any doubt for me would have been a failure. I mean, I would have definitely qualified that by saying that in any knockout competition there are small things that can change any tie or any like position you stand in a knockout competition relative to say a Premier League where it's a marathon. I think it's a true testament of the strength of a squad. So yeah, I mean it's absolutely massive for the club, and I think it's a lot bigger for the people that have been having and probably still do have serious doubts about Wenger and where the club stands, because I think frankly, with the knowledge that whatever happens at this stage or whatever had happened last night, I just really there's no scenario I could have envisaged in which Wenger leaves in the summer, and I just think the entire period leading from now until then would have just been a constant sort of almost warfare on social media and amongst fans, etc. And I just don't think the atmosphere of the club would have been great, which is naturally that's going to have a negative impact on all of us. And frankly, perhaps even more importantly, is we finally beat United at Old Trafford.
Yeah,
we finally got that bloody monkey off our back.
Just for 9 years.
I hate United, and boy does it feel good. I mean, I don't think I do agree with Paul to a certain degree about it changes the way that Alexis and certain players perhaps now feel about the club, and maybe I think especially like to a certain degree in Oxlade-Chamberlain, who you can see as he's the one player that I think when you read about him, who puts a lot of time into learning a lot about the club. Apparently, he was the only player that went to the Invincibles screening, etc., etc. Things like these moments for them are huge, but I don't think you can necessarily refer to it as change. And I think Paul pretty much said this anyway. Until you build upon this, until you look back on the season and you say, well, given X success, or given like the continued run of form from that point on, and the continued ability to pick up 3 points against the lower opposition, and ability to hopefully get to the FA Cup final, that's when you can say that game was a pivotal game, and a game that perhaps had a huge bearing on the way in which the club can now move forward, because I think we keep looking for this sign of progress, and I think that you can now look to this as your case in point of perhaps this is where progress has been made. We finally 9 years it's taken us to win at Old Trafford. We keep talking about not winning away from home against the big sides, and now you don't just look at Man City in isolation. Perhaps if that was the only one, then you could say, well, City were in a bad run of form. But now if you've beaten City away from home, a team that we've struggled with consistently over the last few years, and you've beaten United, the two put together as well, they almost compound upon each other. And so I think there's a lot more reason for us to be optimistic and have a lot of positive energy towards this team. And it's a great team to now be getting behind, because as we keep saying, the squad is strong, and now slowly but surely, if we can see the performance consistently put out there on the pitch, then I think there's a lot of hope to be had.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly willing to be optimistic, at least for the next 10 minutes. I think there's a lot of other things we could go into. Szczesny's performance in his return to the number one position, but we'll have plenty of time to discuss things after the West Ham match. Hopefully it'll be a nice uneventful win, and we can cover some of the topics that maybe we didn't get to today. I think we got a little more philosophical than maybe I had intended, but I think it's moments like this that raise these debates, because apart from Ramsey's winning goal in the FA Cup last year, FA Cup final, I don't know that the managers had a more important goal scored for him than Welbeck's goal in the past 9 years. If we had lost yesterday, I think where we would be today versus where we are now is immeasurably different. So it's great. It's something we should celebrate. It's something that I know I am celebrating, and has reinvigorated my enthusiasm for this season. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, Paul will be right, and something miraculous will happen in Monaco. We won't count on it, but we'll certainly leave the possibility out there. In the meantime, we're going to knock it on the head and call it a day, and come back this weekend after the West Ham match. But before we do that, we'll say goodbye to our lovely guests, who are not really guests, they're just fixtures, they're regulars, they're family. James, you can find him GoonerFanatic49, and I certainly encourage you to follow him on Twitter. James, as always, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure, Elliot. Thank you.
And, of course, the man with the phenomenal insight but dodgy internet, his name is Paul. You can follow him on Twitter at @PositinInMyPants. And, Paul, as ever, it was a delight speaking with you.
Woohoo!
Yes, with gusto. My name is Elliot Smith. I am Yankee Gunner on Twitter. You can follow me there, or unfollow me, block me, abuse me. Preferably not the latter. Never understood the abuse thing. It's like, you don't have to follow me. It's just easier. But if I get retweeted onto your timeline, then abuse the shit out of me. I deserve it. Anyway, up the Arsenal. Great victory. Very, very happy. Hope you're enjoying it wherever you are. Raise a glass, toast the team, and onward to victory at the weekend. Until then, this is the Arsenal Vision Post-Match Podcast, and we will talk to you next time.